Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
Every Christmas, like a ritual carved into granite, they'd post that damn photo, the whole perfect family standing on Grandma's front lawn in those ridiculous matching red and green flannel pajamas, all grinning into the frosty Ohio air, mugs of peppermint cocoa in hand, flanked by golden retrievers wearing elf hats, framed by lights that blinked just slightly out of sync. And every year, without fail, I'd see it. Not in a group chat, not in a text or a "we missed you" call, but on Facebook, on Instagram, on Aunt Karen's public page with her conservative takes and her over-filtered brunches with that familiar caption, "Family means everything, blessed with the best." And every year, just beneath the photo was the list of tag names: Andrew, Claire, Mom, Dad, even fucking Coco, the dog, had her own tag. But never me. Not once, not even as a ghosted silhouette or a casual mention in the comments. It wasn't an oversight, and it wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. You might think that by now, at 31, running my own startup, published in Forbes, speaking at conferences I used to sneak into, I'd be over it. That I'd built up calluses, grown out of the need for a folding chair by the fire, or one of those dollar store stockings with my name glued on in glitter. But the truth is, some parts of you never stop bleeding. They just learn how to hide under expensive sleeves. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was above it, that I was too busy, too evolved, too successful for family drama. But the problem is, you don't stop caring just because it makes you look weak. You just learn to weaponize the ache. This year, I didn't ask if I was invited. I didn't send the usual group text saying I'd be flying home just in case. I didn't ship a box of gifts with handwritten tags, hoping maybe one of them would call to say thanks. I told myself I was finally done trying. But then, on December 18th at 3:46 p.m., my cousin Hannah accidentally sent me a photo that wasn't meant for me. I was in the middle of a Zoom call with a marketing director from Seoul, half-dressed, trying to fix my lighting when my phone lit up. And there it was, the draft of this year's Christmas card. Same lawn, same mugs, same forced smiles, but this time with a new banner stretched across the garage that read, "Home is where the family is." And I wasn't there, again. I didn't even feel anger at first. It was colder than that, like something calcified had shifted inside my chest, like a frozen door creaked open that I'd been pretending didn't exist. I stared at the photo for a long minute. My hand didn't even tremble. I just picked up my phone, opened Safari, and searched Billboard rental Ohio December. There's a specific kind of madness that settles over you when you stop asking for permission. It's quiet, steady, almost clinical. I wasn't acting out of rage. I wasn't trying to be petty. I just knew, bone deep and without hesitation, that this time I wouldn't wait to be forgotten. This time, I would be seen. The logistics weren't as hard as you'd think. Small-town billboard companies love cash and short deadlines. I sent over the artwork by the end of the day. Me in a crisp navy suit, standing in front of the San Francisco skyline, arms folded with a polite, practiced smirk. Underneath the photo, in all caps, in classic white on black, Forbes 30 under 30, but not good enough for dinner? And below that, in red cursive, "Merry Christmas, Grandma." I requested it be installed on December 22nd, just early enough for the family to see it, just late enough that no one could stop it. The spot I chose was directly across from Grandma's house, angled perfectly toward the front lawn, where the photo was always taken. I paid extra for floodlights. I didn't want them to miss it after dark. What started as a spontaneous idea turned into a kind of pilgrimage. I booked the flight back home. Not to join them, God no, just to watch. I wasn't even sure what I hoped to gain. Maybe I wanted someone to call and say it was too much. Maybe I wanted an apology wrapped in guilt. Or maybe I just wanted to finally feel like I could break something after years of being broken. The days leading up to the 22nd passed in a blur. I worked during the day and fine-tuned every pixel of that billboard at night. I added shadowing to the text. I brightened my face slightly. I made sure the contrast popped against the gray December skies. I'd never spent this much time on something so small, but it didn't feel small. It felt like justice, even if only symbolic. And then, on the morning of the 22nd, I stood outside a rental car in a puffer jacket I borrowed from my assistant because I hadn't owned winter clothes in years, and watched a crane hoist my face 30 feet into the air above Maple Lane. Grandma's house looked exactly the same. The icicle lights on the roof, the dented silver reindeer in the yard, the wreath with the sagging bow. For a moment, I felt like I was 8 years old again, standing on that same sidewalk, holding a cookie tin with burnt gingerbread and wondering if anyone would notice if I disappeared. At 11:34 a.m., the last bolt on the billboard was secured. The worker gave me a thumbs up. And at 11:36, Grandma opened her front door. She stepped onto the porch slowly, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders, and then she looked up. I don't know what I expected, shock, anger, confusion, but what I saw was something else entirely. She paused, tilted her head, and then she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just this quiet, knowing smile, like she had seen something inevitable finally arrive. She turned back into the house. The door clicked shut, and just like that, the fire had been lit. They'd spent years cropping me out, ignoring my success, pretending I was too distant, too proud, too not like us to be included. But now I was unavoidable. And this year, they'd have to smile with that billboard watching them from the sky. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was what would come after. The phone calls, the fury, the one message that would make me question whether I'd gone too far. But in that moment, standing there in the cold, watching the snow drift softly down onto my face in 30-foot-high resolution, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt seen. The truth is, once the idea had rooted itself in my mind, it didn't feel like an act of revenge. It felt like an obligation, like something long overdue that had been begging to happen through every awkward silence, every one-sided text thread. Every year, I pretended not to care, while secretly waiting for some tiny sign that I still mattered to the people who used to tuck me in and call me our wild card. What started as a jolt of impulse quickly turned into something that consumed me with unnerving clarity, like my brain had been waiting for this one moment of precision after years of noise and dissonance. I spent the better part of that night sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my apartment, laptop open, coffee going cold beside me, scrolling through dozens of stock billboard photos, testing fonts, fussing with the lighting of my portrait, adjusting my jawline to look powerful but not vindictive, all while a part of me kept whispering that maybe, just maybe, this was too much. But another part, the part that had sat silently through birthdays with no calls, Thanksgiving spent refreshing inboxes for a message that never came, and years of knowing that my achievements meant less to them than my absence at one barbecue, that part was finally louder. That part said, let them see what they tried to pretend didn't exist. The billboard company I chose, Horizon Signs of Central Ohio, was more than happy to take my money, especially since I was paying double for rush installation. I picked a digital spot with great visibility, positioned right at the end of Maple Lane, a few paces from the stop sign, where every car would inevitably pause before continuing on into the heart of the neighborhood, where my entire extended family had practically nested over the years. It wasn't just visible from Grandma's house. It dominated the view. Every morning coffee on the porch, every trip to get the mail, every holiday photo staged beneath her sagging magnolia tree would be haunted by my face looking down at them in silent, gleaming defiance. I chose a photo from a conference I'd keynoted in Copenhagen last year. A clean headshot with cool lighting, my navy blue suit tailored to perfection, my hair pulled back in a way that made me look like the kind of woman who didn't flinch when rooms went silent after she spoke. Underneath, I wrote the line slowly, deliberately, tasting each word. Forbes 30 under 30, but not good enough for dinner? And then beneath that, a signature in red cursive like a taunt masquerading as sentimentality. Merry Christmas, Grandma. That was the detail that twisted the knife. Not rage, not fury, just a smile through clenched teeth. While the design team finalized the layout, I sat on my balcony, staring out at the Bay Bridge, pretending to answer emails while trying not to imagine the reaction. I knew my mother would call it embarrassing and say I was being dramatic. I knew my brother Andrew would roll his eyes, remind me I'd always been the outsider, as if being different was a personality flaw that needed correcting. And I knew someone, probably Aunt Karen, would throw the word ungrateful around like a frisbee at the next wine night. But what none of them would be able to do, what they couldn't erase or crop or ignore, was pretend I wasn't real. Not this time. It's strange how clearly I remember the logistics. Paying the invoice, booking my flight, choosing the rental car, even confirming that the floodlights would be set on a timer so the billboard stayed visible past sundown. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, not that anyone would have been expecting me anyway. The last time I'd been home was 2 years ago, and I'd only lasted 36 hours before a casual joke about my city lifestyle escalated into a screaming match about values, respect, and the fact that I had chosen ambition over connection. That's what they always said when they needed to justify pushing me out. You chose this life, Jenna. We didn't do this to you. What they never acknowledged, what they likely never even noticed, was how many times I had still tried. I sent birthday cards. I sent care packages when Claire's daughter was sick. I Venmoed gas money when Andrew got laid off and forgot to mention it at the last family Zoom. I drove 3 hours out of my way one Thanksgiving just to drop off a pie and wasn't even invited in. And still, every year, they'd smile into the camera as if they were whole, as if I was just some relic of the past, too difficult to mention. When I landed in Ohio on the 21st, the sky was heavy with the kind of gray that makes everything feel suspended, like the air itself is holding its breath. The roads were slick, the streets quiet, and I could feel the ghost of my teenage self sitting in the passenger seat beside me, legs crossed, chewing her lip, wondering if this was brave or pathetic. But I didn't let myself linger in that space. I had made a decision, and I would see it through, not for them, not for validation, but because sometimes the only way to heal is to burn the thing that broke you into something new. I stayed at a Marriott 15 minutes outside of town, declined room service, ignored my phone, and stared at the ceiling while the digital version of my face was being hoisted above a neighborhood that had once felt like home. I didn't sleep much. My dreams were strange, a swirl of laughter behind closed doors, of my childhood bedroom turning inside out, of standing outside in the snow, screaming, while no one inside even turned to look. And then the next morning, I drove to the site. When I got there, the crew was already at work, their truck blocking half the road, orange cones set up like it was any other job. But it wasn't, not to me. I stepped out of the car, pulled my hood up, and watched. 30 minutes later, the screen flickered to life. There I was, 30 feet high, proud, composed, deliberate. And then, right on cue, the front door across the street opened. My grandmother stepped outside slowly, as if drawn by some invisible thread, adjusting the collar of her winter coat, clutching a small tin of cookies, her eyes scanning the sky like she already knew what she was going to see. When they finally settled on the billboard, her hand paused midair. She didn't gasp, she didn't frown, she just looked. And then, after a long pause, she nodded, just once. A small, almost imperceptible motion, and I realized in that moment I wasn't sure if she approved or not. I wasn't even sure she was surprised. Maybe she'd always known. Maybe that was the problem. There's a certain silence that settles in the hours after you strike the match. A kind of anticipatory stillness that doesn't feel like peace, but more like the moment before a storm hits, when even the birds know to hold their breath. And I spent that silence sitting in a worn-out leather armchair at the edge of my hotel room, watching the snowfall blur the view of the parking lot and waiting for the inevitable explosion of reactions, accusations, and carefully disguised outrage, dressed up as concern that I knew would find its way to me like moths drawn to the sudden heat of an unexpected fire. I didn't have to wait long. By the time the clock rolled past noon, my phone lit up like it was auditioning for a fireworks show. First with a barrage of messages, then with a few missed calls, and then, as I expected, with a group text that hadn't included me in years suddenly resurrected from the dead, with a title that said Barnes Family, like that meant something. The first message was from my mother, and it came without any greeting, preamble, or even the courtesy of punctuation. Just one long sentence that read, "I don't know what you think you're trying to prove, but this is not the way to handle things, Jenna." The second came from my brother Andrew, who managed to be both condescending and passive-aggressive in exactly 12 words. Only you would turn Christmas into a publicity stunt for your ego. Then came Aunt Karen's contribution, complete with 3 exclamation points and a crying emoji. I'm sure she thought made her point softer. You could have killed your grandmother with that billboard. But the message that landed hardest wasn't from any of them. It came from Claire, my younger cousin, the only one who ever texted me on her own over the years. The one who'd asked me to edit her college applications, and once confided that she felt like an accessory in her own family. Her text was short, quiet, and had none of the punctuation gymnastics of the others. It simply read, I saw it, honestly, kind of iconic. That was the first time I laughed all day. Not a loud laugh, not triumphant. Just the kind of sharp exhale that reminded me I wasn't crazy, that someone out there had seen what I'd done and didn't immediately feel the need to moralize it to death. Of course, the real chaos didn't begin until the photo of the billboard ended up on X, formerly Twitter, shared by someone I barely knew, a classmate from high school who lived a few blocks away, and had apparently driven past it on the way to a Christmas Eve rehearsal at the community center. She'd posted a photo with the caption, "Just past this in our neighborhood, the energy, the pettiness, the power. Whoever you are, I salute you." Within hours, it had over 30,000 likes, and my DMs were full of podcast hosts, freelance journalists, strangers quoting me back to myself like I'd just launched a movement. Some called me a hero, some called me bitter. One particularly bold man from Austin offered to marry me on the spot if I ever needed a real family for the holidays. The media buzz would have been funny if it weren't so surreal. People dissecting a single sentence on a billboard as if it were performance art or a thesis on generational trauma, when really, it was just me, raw and tired and done being edited out of my own story. I watched from the sidelines as hashtags popped up, #Forbes but not dinner, #Billboard revenge, #Jenna from the sky. And while the internet turned me into a character, my family was still on the ground, fuming, deflecting, and most importantly, still refusing to ask the only question that mattered. Why they didn't ask why I felt the need to go that far. Why I couldn't just come talk to them like an adult. As if there had ever been a time they wanted to hear anything I had to say that didn't align with the clean, quiet image they preferred. They didn't ask if I was hurt. They didn't ask if I was lonely. They didn't ask if maybe, just maybe, they had played a role in making me feel like a ghost wearing a pantsuit. Instead, they circled the wagons, posted an emergency Christmas photo, this time in blue sweaters instead of red, as if changing the color scheme could cleanse the optics, and flooded the comments section with the usual noise. Grateful beyond words. Family first. Some things just can't be broken. But this time, the comments didn't go as planned. Strangers, emboldened by the viral billboard, started asking questions. Where's Jenna? Isn't she the one in Forbes? Didn't she do that thing with the app? Why wasn't she invited? And then, as if someone flipped a switch, the photo disappeared. Just gone. Replaced the next day by a blurry close-up of Grandma's cinnamon rolls and a caption about staying warm and safe. No people, no tags, no mentions, just silence. And that silence, more than the messages, more than the angry calls, more than the stiff upper lips and faux unity, told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sorry, and they weren't changing. They were just retreating until the heat died down, until they could go back to pretending I was the problem, the drama queen, the difficult daughter who couldn't just be grateful for what she had. But then, just when I thought the fallout had reached its peak, just when I had finally started to unclench my jaw, a text came through that didn't feel like noise. It was from my mother. Just 5 words. No punctuation, no emojis, just raw, brittle words that landed like a cold blade to the spine. Your grandmother isn't doing well. I stared at the screen for a full minute, reading it again and again, wondering if it was a guilt trip, a manipulation, or something else entirely. She didn't say what was wrong. She didn't say what had happened. Just that. And suddenly the power I'd felt in watching that billboard go up started to slip through my fingers like sand in a cracked hourglass. Because if this had hurt Grandma, if this had pushed her health in any way, what had I really won? What if, in trying to finally be seen, I'd gone too far? What if all they'd remember about me now was that? And just like that, the story wasn't simple anymore. I didn't sleep the night that message came in, not because I believed her entirely, because years of emotional whiplash from my mother had taught me that everything she said came wrapped in implication, barbed with unspoken conditions, and layered with just enough truth to make the guilt stick. But because somewhere deep beneath my practiced indifference and armored sarcasm, I still felt the tug, the aching root of something soft and human that refused to die, something that whispered, what if she's telling the truth this time? What if Grandma really is sick, and this billboard, this moment of finally reclaiming the narrative, this one act of fire and defiance, ends with someone I love collapsing under the weight of it? So I packed a bag I didn't intend to use and got into the rental car I hadn't driven since arriving, and without telling a soul, not even Claire, not the internet, not even my assistant back in San Francisco who would later panic when she couldn't reach me for an entire day, I drove the familiar path into the part of town I had sworn off years ago, the streets that looked like nothing had changed even as everything in me had. The houses still had their oversized candy cane lights, their reindeer made from wire and hope, their blinking windows announcing holiday cheer to passers-by, who probably had no idea what really lived behind those doors. I slowed at every intersection, half hoping for a reason to turn around, half praying for a detour that would let me stay the villain just a little longer, because as long as I didn't see them, I could keep believing I was right, that they were the problem, that I had finally broken the cycle in a way that mattered. But the truth about revenge, the ugly, hollow, inconvenient truth they never put in the movies, is that once you've delivered it, once the echo of your voice fades from the billboard and the world stops clapping, you're left alone with the ashes, trying to remember why it felt so necessary to burn the thing you once called home. When I turned onto Maple Lane, the street looked deceptively still, like a memory frozen in mid-breath. And there across the road, just where I'd planned it, was the billboard, still lit despite the gray afternoon light, still proud, still loud, still mine. I parked 3 blocks away, not because I was hiding, but because walking gave me time to recalibrate, to pull my coat tighter and let the cold settle into my lungs like penance. Grandma's house looked exactly as I remembered it. Too beige, too clean, the lawn too trimmed for winter, and the wreath on the door slightly tilted to the left, as if she'd hung it herself without asking for help, as she always had. The driveway was full, my parents' SUV, Andrew's pretentious hybrid, Claire's beat-up sedan, even Aunt Karen's minivan with the God is my pilot bumper sticker still clinging to the back like hope deferred. Inside, I could see movement through the windows, people milling around, laughter muted by glass, silhouettes of lives I had once belonged to. They were already eating, or at least pretending to eat, forks clinking, heads bent in faux prayer, someone lifting a wine glass in a toast to togetherness. I didn't walk up to the door. I stood across the street, behind the safety of a neighbor's dormant hydrangea bush, and just watched. Watched them laugh, watched them smile, watched them live out the illusion. And for a moment, I wondered if this was how ghosts felt, present, aware, still tethered, but invisible, unable to knock loud enough to be let in. Then the door opened, and Andrew stepped out. He didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe he had expected it. Maybe they all had. Maybe this was part of the playbook now, the final act where the prodigal daughter shows up out of guilt and gets offered leftovers and tight-lipped forgiveness, only to be reminded, over coffee and passive comments, that she was still fundamentally different, still unwelcome in ways that couldn't be said out loud. He crossed the lawn with that same stiff gait he used to have when he was trying to look important in high school debates, stopped 2 feet in front of me and said nothing, not at first. When he finally did speak, his voice was low and controlled, as if he were diffusing a bomb instead of talking to his sister. "You got what you wanted," he said. "You made your point. You humiliated everyone. Are you happy now?" I didn't answer right away because there are some questions that require more than answers. They require years of unsaid things to rise to the surface and be dissected before anything resembling truth can be spoken. So I asked him something instead. "When did you all decide I didn't count anymore?" He blinked, the kind of blink that buys time but doesn't offer honesty. And then he shrugged like the whole thing was just some misunderstanding, some communication lapse, some mutual drifting apart, even though I knew better. "You decided that," he said. "When you left, when you made it clear that your life came first, we just stopped trying." And there it was, the quiet accusation that ambition and self-respect were betrayals, that choosing myself over their traditions was selfish, that success was only admirable if it stayed humble and quiet and came home for dinner. He didn't say anything else, just turned and walked back toward the house, the door closing behind him like a book slammed shut. I didn't move. I stood there long enough for the cold to pierce through my boots, for the sound of laughter to grow louder before fading again, for the lights on the billboard to cycle once more through their loop. They hadn't changed. They'd just gotten better at pretending. As I turned to leave, I heard the front door creak open again, footsteps on the porch. I didn't turn back this time, not until I reached the end of the sidewalk, but then I glanced over my shoulder, and there she was, Grandma wrapped in a heavy coat, her silver hair tucked under a red knit hat, leaning slightly on the railing, her eyes fixed not on the house, not on the street, but on the billboard. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She just stood there, staring at that 30-foot version of me. And then, just like before, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of approval or scorn. It was something older than both. Something more like recognition, like resignation, like she knew all along this would come. And maybe she hadn't stopped it because maybe, deep down, she thought I was right. I left without saying a word. Because some dinners never happen, and some doors don't reopen. Not because you slam them, but because they were never truly open to begin with. And sometimes, knowing that is the real freedom. The days after I left Ohio passed in a blur so eerily silent and smooth that they didn't feel like real time, but more like something processed in the background of my consciousness, as though my mind was shielding me from replaying the confrontation, the non-apology, and the image of my grandmother standing alone in the cold, beneath that glowing billboard, her fragile frame illuminated by something too heavy to name. I returned to San Francisco, as if walking back into a life I had borrowed from someone else. My sleek apartment, the hum of the city, the clinking of glasses in rooftop bars full of people with polished ambition and curated traumas. But nothing I'd built, no press coverage or investor call or power suit, could stop the replay of that final glance, that smile so faint and heavy, it felt like a closing curtain. In the days that followed, the virality of the moment began to dissolve, as it always does, replaced by newer controversies, fresher gossip, someone else's 15 minutes of righteous flame, and the billboard, once the centerpiece of digital outrage and reluctant admiration, was quietly taken down by the sign company in accordance with the contract's final date. No ceremony, no lingering statement, just an empty frame above Maple Lane once more, as if none of it had ever happened. I didn't post about it. I didn't do the interview segments I'd agreed to. I didn't take the calls from well-meaning podcast hosts hoping to spin my story into a brand about disrupting toxic family systems or empowerment through spectacle. I ghosted every outlet, let the moment die, and returned to my work with a strange hollowness that didn't feel like relief, but more like something unresolved, like a door still ajar in a room I wasn't ready to enter. Then, sometime in February, as the city thawed and the chaos of the holidays became just another memory blurred by the passing of weeks, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox, handwritten in black ink. No return address, no markings beyond my name, Ms. Jenna Barnes, scrawled in a slanted, narrow hand that felt too deliberate to be random, but too unfamiliar to identify immediately. For a brief moment, I considered tossing it out. After everything, I had trained myself not to expect sentiment without strings, but something about the weight of it, the quietness of its arrival, made me pause. Inside was a single photograph, old, slightly creased at the edges, and clearly taken from a dusty box, rather than any digital archive. It was me, maybe 7 years old, standing in Grandma's kitchen in an apron far too big, covered in flour and midlaff, missing a front tooth, holding up a crooked gingerbread man with more frosting than structure. Beside me, also in an apron, was Grandma, looking at me instead of the camera, her smile subtle and steady, not the performative grin of holiday photos, but the kind of smile someone gives when they're seeing, not just looking, but seeing. Tucked behind the photo, almost hidden, was a post-it note, faded and soft at the edges, with only 5 words written in the same unfamiliar script. I was always watching. That was all. No explanation, no sentimentality, no demands for forgiveness or calls for reconciliation, just that. A photograph, a memory I had forgotten, and a sentence that landed in the pit of my stomach like a stone skipping across deep water, rippling out into thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to consider. What if she had seen everything? What if all these years she hadn't forgotten me or chosen to ignore me but had simply stayed silent, trapped in the current of a family where speaking up meant choosing sides and choosing sides meant losing people? What if her smile beneath that billboard wasn't approval, wasn't a goodbye, but was something closer to acknowledgement, her quiet way of saying, "You did what I couldn't. You said the thing I never dared to speak." And yet, even as those thoughts flickered through me, I couldn't ignore the other possibility, the darker one, the idea that maybe the note wasn't from her at all, that someone else, someone with access to old photos and half-stories, had sent it, that maybe it was meant to comfort or confuse or manipulate me in a way I couldn't decipher. Because that's the thing about families like mine. Truth is always wrapped in fog, and love, when it appears, often carries more questions than answers. I pinned the photo above my desk, not as a trophy, not as evidence, but as a reminder that memory is messy, and love isn't always loud. I didn't call my mother. I didn't return Andrew's one voicemail, some attempt at civility maybe, or just an empty performance for his own conscience. I didn't reach out to anyone, not because I was angry, not even because I was afraid, but because I'd finally understood something I had spent years trying to prove wrong. Sometimes the apology never comes, the invitation never arrives. The seat at the table remains empty, not because you were never good enough, but because your presence made them confront too much about themselves. And that's not something everyone is built for. Some evenings, when the city quiets and the sound of my neighbor's laughter slips through the vent like a memory I never owned, I still catch myself wondering if they talk about me now. If the silence after Christmas was a truce or a scar, if Grandma ever told them she'd smiled. But I never ask, because the version of me they erased no longer needs their recognition to exist. What I needed was to be seen. And that year, for once, I was. Not in a holiday card, not in a filtered photo next to a cousin who only hugged me when a camera was present, but in the sky, in bold letters, in a voice too large to ignore. And whether they heard it or not, whether they understood or just raged in confusion, it didn't matter anymore. Because I knew I was good enough, then Now, always, even if they never say it out loud.